All right. Welcome back to the Future School podcast. And we haven't done this in a while. I've been super busy and wrapping up the semester, and things have been kind of crazy. But I'm trying to get back to it. And we're going to have today, we have one of our veteran advisors, Crystal Eckles, who's with us today.
Thanks for having me, Boyd.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Crystal. Now, I'll probably let Crystal talk a little bit about her background, but what I'll say is that Crystal has one of the distinct honors of she has gone with an advisory and seen them from 10th grade all the way up to graduation, and has now looped around and is with a 10th grade advisory again. And I don't think anybody else has done that. Nathaniel kind of, but not really, because he's played musical chairs with advisories, unfortunately, and had to step into a lot of different roles. But I think you're our sole advisor. That makes you kind of the veteran advisor around here.
Yeah.
So, Crystal, can you talk a little bit about how you how you got into Future School and sort of what your role's been?
Yeah. So I originally was a paraprofessional at another school, and I remember sitting down and reading an article in the newspaper about Future School. It was an article, they were interviewing Trish. And she was talking about the school, and I was like, God, I want to email her. But I was a little nervous to reach out. And so the teacher that I was working with at the time, she's like, oh, send her an email and tell her you're interested. So I sent her an email, and we actually met at a coffee shop, and we talked for like an hour or so just about what her hopes and dreams were for Future, and why come into Fort Smith to actually start this school. Because, I mean, she could have chose anywhere to go to with this school, but Fort Smith was where she wanted to build this in this community, the school. So I, after that, I was still working as a para, but I still helped with a lot of things that Future School was doing at the time, doing a lot of create-a-thons and just meetings with students and things like that. And then I got hired on the second year that Future was here.
Yeah, I remember meeting you at create-a-thons and you being kind of a presence there right at the beginning. I mean, before we had a building or anything. And then that first year, the hiring stuff was so crazy because we didn't know how many kids we're going to have and who we're going to be able to hire and all that. So then second year, we were able to bring you on, which was super awesome. Talk about, I mean, I personally have seen so much growth, I feel like, from you over your time at Future School, from coming in kind of, fresh face, started out teaching, and to now, I mean, you're in a educational leadership program, and you've just kind of, like I said earlier, you've kind of become a veteran teacher. How do you think about that, about your growth while you've been at Future?
Sometimes I'm shocked. Sometimes I'm like, wow, have I really come this far? Because I've only been at Future for 4 years. It's my fourth year there. I'm coming in new as a teacher, first year teacher, period. I was a paraprofessional at first, but I was not responsible for the entire class by itself. And so coming in as a first teacher was intimidating. And then coming into Future, doing things completely different than a traditional school was a little intimidating as well. So I tried to learn as much as I could from people that were there the year before. And I think that's what helps you grow. It's like you're in an environment where we not only push our students to grow, but we push our staff to grow. So it's almost like it just happens. You just want to do better as an educator yourself. You want to do better for your students. So you tend to just grow with them daily and every year, really.
Yeah, I think that's so accurate as far as mindset, how important that is. And I think, it doesn't matter how much you talked about that you came in and didn't have a ton of teaching experience before coming in, but I think sometimes that's an advantage at our school too, because we are so different. And so it doesn't matter if you're a 25-year teaching veteran or what you are, you're going to have to, there's a learning curve with Future regardless of that.
It definitely is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's been really amazing to just sort of watch you start owning, so much of different aspects of the school and your advisory, and just see that growth process has been, to turn into a what I see as a real leader on our campus, and that's cool.
Thank you.
What do you think like with? We'll talk a little about this. So let's say somebody is coming in and they're a 10-year teaching veteran at a traditional environment, what do you think some of the things that are gonna be different at Future that they haven't seen?
I think it's really knowing the students. I think in a traditional setting, you only know a student for whatever content you're teaching them. You may get these little relationships outside of that, but like you're really responsible for the entire kid as a whole. It's just not just about their education. It's about whatever troubles they're having in school, whatever troubles they're having outside of school. And you really become, another parent to the kid. So it's really different. The best advice I could ever give to a new person is actually to just grab a hold to somebody that's been there, and you learn through them, and you work together with the different people that are at Future School, and not just the advisors, because we have teachers and staff that are not advisors that kind of take on those roles as well with these students. So it's really just taking a hold to the entire staff that we have there at Future to help you along the way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know at the end of last year, you and I had some conversations, because it's weird as an advisor, you start with those kids in 10th grade, and after 3 years, things, not that we always have a growth mindset, and things can change and we can always move along. But you do get kind of like, this is the way this advisory culture is, this is the way our interactions are. And then you and I talked about it, as you circle back around to 10th grade, you get a chance to like to hit reboot and start over again. So what were some of the lessons that you took that you think and of course, saying what you did this year is weird because it's been such an outlier year. So, I mean, there's going to be differences just because of that. But what are some of the things that you set out to do sort of differently as you cycle back around?
I think making sure that they're holding themselves accountable for their work. Though I am their advisor and I'm there to push them to do great, I can't do the work for them. And we expect a lot from them. We are constantly looking at grades. There's no flying under the radar at Future at all when it comes to grades. We are constantly looking at grades. We're constantly knowing exactly what they're doing, even if it's not in our classroom. We know, so we're holding them accountable for not only those grades, their attitudes, the way they act at school. And so that was one of the things last year with the class that I just graduated. And I said this year, I really want to start 10th grade year holding them accountable for every, thing they do. You can't, slide through on little things, and you may think they're small, but they're not, because the things that you do 10th grade year can affect your 11th grade year, and then so on to your 12th grade year, and so on to when you graduate. So really holding them accountable for the things that their decisions that they have.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I'm pretty sure that's one of our interview questions that we've always used in the past. It's like, how do you balance, you have this really tight relationship with these kids, you're super supportive, you're trying to advocate for them, you're their mentor. I mean, you are their friend in some ways, but then how do you also balance that with needing to be disciplinarian, needing to hold accountable, needing to do all those things? And, of course, we use that interview question. You get lots of great answers from people, but until they've experienced it, there really is no answer, right?
Yeah. And I think those relationships I think that's the key thing. I think helping them understand that we care. That's not why we may, speak to them about things that they're not doing correctly. And I think when they know that it's coming from an honest place, they know that it's coming from a loving place, they take it a little better than they would if it's just some teacher that they have no clue who you are. And it's like, what are you doing? First of all, don't talk like, then you get the attitude back. But I think when they know that you care and love for them, I think they take it a little better.
Yeah, I think it's one of the big pieces that we always talk about, just that kind of love being at the center of what we do at Future, and the relationships, and that's really like, to some kids, you think they're high school kids and that sounds corny or whatever, but I think it's not, and they see that. And I think it's one of the things that one of our big successes is kind of having students transform the way that they think about school and the people that they're working alongside of, being their kid, the other students, but also the teachers, the administrators, everybody. There's just a different dynamic in that relationship.
Yeah, definitely.
And that advisor, especially this role, it's been like this year, the advisor role has been like advisor on steroids.
It definitely has.
For those that don't know, we this year, I mean, we're a high school, but in a lot of ways we became more like an elementary school in the way that we do the way that we do our school day now. And so those kids come in and they're with their advisor all day. And yeah, they have a math hour while they're in that advisory, or a math block of time, but it's watching the math teacher who's pre-recorded a lesson, and that advisor, who Crystal, for example, the English teacher, she gets to help work with those kids on math, and then she gets to thankfully switch to the English block, which is a little bit more in her comfort zone, and then in science and so on. And so really, these advisors have become like elementary school generalists in a lot of ways this year. Had to. And we did that. I mean, I think for anybody that's familiar with COVID would understand why it helped us with social distancing and keeping our pods together. So we ended up with very low COVID counts this year, and never had to truly shut down so far for COVID. And so that was one reason. And another reason, in all honesty, was we said, we have a license right now to be experimental, to try some things outside the box. We've always talked about this, could you have a school day where they're with their advisors all day, and that advisor is helping each individual progress along their path. And so we've always talked about this, and COVID kind of forced our hand. And so we said, let's try this out. So I think, we've had some mixed successes. What do you think are some of the successes that we've had out of this experiment that we did this semester?
I think for me, being a 10th grade advisor, getting new kids, I know that's different from an 11th grade advisor or 12th grade advisor. They've already built those relationships with their kids. They've had them 2 years, 3 years. Me getting new 10th graders this year, I was actually given the time to really understand my kids, really get to learn more about them versus our traditional schedule where I only got them an hour a day. So that was a plus, is getting these new 10th graders in and actually getting to learn their study habits, what they're good at, what they're not good at, their strengths, their weaknesses, what they don't like about school, really trying to figure out what it is that they really want to do after high school. So that was definitely a plus, is getting more time with my advisory kids. And then again, that was also kind of double-edged sword of them being in there all day. So it was kind of hard for them trying to transition their minds from being able to swap classes to being now stuck in one classroom all day.
Yeah, it gives you, which I think anybody who's taught high school and has been around, elementary school teachers and who has had kids in an elementary classroom or just, witnessed one, you appreciate what they do, but I think we all have a even greater appreciation for what they do.
Yes. Oh, yes, I do. Because we're only 9 to 2, and they're there earlier and later.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's I think it's just, I think to me, one of the things that kind of hurt us in this model, that I think, because some big picture schools do this model, was that not having that internship as locked down as we could have if we didn't have COVID going on. So, I think that's what makes that whole thing click, is if that advisor and that mentor and that kid can be really driving the learning and individualizing the learning around that internship process and doing projects within that, then I think it really gives a little bit more meaningful stuff to happen during that time.
Definitely that internship piece.
Yeah. Oh, it's that the relationships, and you've always been good with relationships with students, and and them having you, or you being their person and them being really tight with you and feeling like they can come to you. And I'll be really curious to see, as you say, with this group, you feel like you've gotten to know them even better, like what the sort of, what the long-term implications for that will be, when they're juniors and seniors, and building this really solid base in that first semester, if that then pays off dividends down the road.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because I saw a lot of reflecting in their exhibitions this year about time management, about really taking their time. Because yes, they're in class from 9 to 2 all day, but it's almost a gift to them because they are able to. They only look at a certain amount of classes a day. So like Monday, it was only English. Our 10th graders didn't have a history class this year because we moved civics and econ to 12th grade year. So technically on Mondays and Thursdays, they only had English in their electives. So they could easily get that work done real quick and then have time to do advisory stuff or give a time to just kind of load off for a second. And so they kind of started realizing that at the end of the year, I had some kids who automatically was like, okay, I'm going to come in here, get my work done, and then I'll be good. And I don't have to hear Miss Crystal's mouth. But then some of them were like, we'll just wait to the end of the day to get it done. But I saw a lot of reflecting on that in their exhibitions about using their time more wisely next semester and trying to stay on top of their work. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, we all know that that's like a continuum of growth. If we can get them to start taking those non-cognitive skills around time management and things like that, and really start to grow in those as well. I mean, that's one of the big benefits we feel like of advisory and exhibitions is getting them to start owning that process, because a lot of them aren't used to that ownership at all. That interesting. What do you think? So you have, on any given day, you have how many kids in your advisory? You have a big one, unfortunately,
So I have over 20 kids. I think I have like 21, 22, somewhere in there. Yeah. But on any given day, I may have about 13 in the class. And I have some that only have one that's full virtual.
Mm-hmm. So you only had one kid that was totally virtual.
Yeah, one kid that was totally virtual, and the rest of them were blended. And then it was a small percentage of them that were blended. Most of them were there every day. Yeah. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday.
Yeah. It's funny, Crystal, because I remember whenever we were first starting to talk about COVID, we said, it's so our 11th and 12th grade kids, like they can start to be released a little more and they maybe don't have to be on campus as much, but we've got to get those 10th graders on campus. And we really didn't do a whole lot to intentionally make that happen, but I think it just kind of happened. Maybe they recognized that need as well. I don't know.
Yeah, they just wanted to be there. They'd rather be at school than be at home.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you look at the amount of like virtual in a senior advisory versus a 10th grade advisory, it's a huge difference. There's way more kids that are virtual in our senior advisories than they were in their 10th. So so it worked out for whatever reason. It's just we were thinking about it a whole lot this summer, and so that
I'm trying to figure it out. Yeah.
So what would you say with the virtual, what's the biggest challenge? And you only had one kid that was full virtual. I know she was pretty exceptional and really did a good job with it. But just sort of watching everybody else as well, what's the biggest challenge with that virtual piece?
The biggest challenge was trying to make sure that they were still a part of the community. Even though they were virtual and they were not there physically with us, she's still a part of our advisory. And really trying to figure out the right time to do our circles. Because even though she's at home, she's on her own schedule. She's not on the same schedule as we are at school. She's not doing math, English first thing in the morning. She may be doing it later on. So trying to figure out, the best time to actually do circles. Originally, I was doing circles at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I had to kind of rethink that. And I'm just like, I don't think that works for my advisory kids at school or her virtually, because my advisory kids at school were like in the momentum of getting things done. And I don't want to break that. And then she's probably, I don't know if she's even up at 10 yet. So I'm just like, okay, let's move that to about 12 o'clock. That gives her time to kind of get out the bed, yawn and things. And then that gives my students at school actual time to get work done before interrupting that space. So trying to figure out the time to circle, trying to make sure that she's a part of the community, make sure I'm still doing one-on-ones with her just as well as I'm doing one-on-ones with my kids that are that are at school. So that was one of the hard pieces of having the virtual kids.
Yeah, I think that's what we're talking about. That, we do depend on leveraging those relationships so much, within our model. And if you don't, and that's why I said we had to have 10th graders on campus so that we can develop those relationships, because without that, it's going to be super hard for us to have, to be effective with them.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. What do you think within the model that we decided for COVID, where they're with the advisor all day? You've talked about some of the challenges, but what do you think, like, what were the things that you think kind of were really challenging, or you think were hard, or that maybe suffered as a result of that?
I will say the most challenging thing was, I think you talked about this earlier. I'm an English teacher. That's what I went to school for. So my math stopped when I took college math. I didn't think any more of it. And so then having to now become a geometry teacher, a biology teacher. I did have one student that was taking civics and econ. I had these electives, American Sign Language, drama, art. And so now I'm now responsible for all of these courses for these kids. And I'm just like, oh my God, I don't know what to do here. And so that was probably the hardest part, is trying to make sure that I'm providing them with the support, providing them with the help that they need. With those courses, I was still able to reach out to teachers that actually taught the class, and they would come in, make time to come over to help, or they could actually go to them. So I think that was probably the hardest part, is trying to facilitate all of those classes in there with my kids.
Yeah, and that's one of the side parts, and Amelie and I, we did an interview where we talked about this a little bit, but the sort of level of transparency this created amongst us about our practice and all that. What were some of the, because all of a sudden, because sometimes it's not even like the lesson, it's not like, oh, the math teacher did a bad lesson, or I don't understand the lesson, but it's maybe I don't understand the grading practices, or I don't understand like when work's being taken, it's just that whole thing, which I've facilitated my virtual Arkansas classes before, and trying to wrap your heads around everybody's different procedures, be really difficult. What were some of the things that sort of stood out to you on that, or that was good about that process of seeing everybody, or that helped you reflect on your own way of doing things, or I don't know what
even though it was hard, being the facilitator, I really enjoyed being able to know what my kids were working on versus, years before, I knew my students had those classes, but I didn't know exactly what it was they were working on in their math or science classes. So it was really interesting and fun to learn that and actually be able to see, what they're responsible for. So that was a plus.
Yeah.
And it was transparent because I'm able to see what everybody at Future School is teaching. Everything that's being graded, I was able to see that. And that made me a better advisor because I can see more versus just, going into eSchool and just seeing, okay, this is what your grade is. I actually know exactly what you are being responsible for in different classes.
This is one of those things that a lot of schools try to do as far as recording and watching each other and observing each other. And of course, we talked about that, everybody, oh, we're going to do that this year. And, I've heard it for, 20 years in education of, we're going to do peer observations and we're going to record each other and watch it and debrief and all that. And of course, every year everybody gets busy and, unless it's a real priority, it doesn't happen. But of course, we kind of forced ourselves to do that. Yeah. What were some of the pain points of that process, like the areas that kind of were hard to push through? And then what were some of the kind of like growths from that process?
I think having to do the recordings, I think just COVID made my teaching better, to be honest. It made me a better teacher, more effective, because they don't have me. They don't have me in a class. So whatever I'm giving them in that video, whatever assignment I'm giving them in Google Classroom, it had to be to where every kid, it was accessible, where they could all get it. So I really had to do a lot of thinking with the assignment that I gave versus what I would have given them traditionally in a classroom, pre-COVID. So that really made me better. I really enjoyed, we had a PD day where we were able to sit down and kind of look at each other's videos and what each other was doing, in their classes. And so that was that was probably like one of my best PDs this year, was being able to sit down with my peers and watch their videos and critique it and give advice and instill things from them that they were doing, in their classes. So.
Yeah. I mean, start thinking about my time as a teacher. And, there were times I might put an assignment together and it wasn't that, that well thought out. But I could depend on, I'll see these kids tomorrow and we can kind of work through that and adapt it or do whatever we need to do. I can answer questions. I could. But the other thing you realize is that's actually, you think you're doing fine by doing that, but it's really poor practice because I mean, the fact is there's kids that aren't there that day that you're re-explaining the assignment. I mean, there's kids that are going to be out. There's kids that are zoned out. There's kids that are pulled out of the class for some reason. And so, you've created this thing that supposedly explains what the assignment is. And then you're kind of on the fly altering that, or you're adapting, and monitoring, adjusting is fine. But you do need to understand that adjusting that you're doing is not really reaching, everybody doesn't have a window into those adjustments always. And so it's inequitable whenever you start doing that, because it sort of, rewards the kids who are there and are able to be there and are focused in, and then everybody else can just like, isn't necessarily
Figure it
good. And I kind of realize that about a lot of things, of like how much of like what we do in the classroom, like we feel like we're covering it. We feel like we've said that, but it may just be 5 or 6 kids in that classroom that actually tuned into the fact that we, either changed something or assigned something or have asked for something, and so finding ways to like, I think that's one of the things that COVID's made us do is we've got kids that are here 2 days and then not here 2 days, kids that aren't here at all, kids that may have to be gone for 2 weeks because they're on quarantine. Like you start really examining like, how do I make sure that this communication of whatever it is really getting out there?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So whenever observing your own practice, what are some of the things that you think like moving forward, if so we're going to go back, hopefully it's semester, and start, getting to teach face-to-face classes again, and you'll actually have kids in your English class that you're doing an English class to, and so those kids will be virtual though, and they may be synchronous, and on at the same time and watching, but there may be kids that it's recorded and it's asynchronous whenever they do it. So what are some of the practices that you think you'll keep moving forward into that environment?
I know one of the things that I did, and I did it one time this semester, and that was, we were reading Nicholas Carr's What the Internet is Doing to Our Brain. And with that, it's a very heavy book, if anyone has ever read it. And so it requires a lot of articles to read outside of that book. And so I decided for one lesson, instead of me assigning those articles per class, I assigned them per advisory. So for instance, Lindsay's advisory got the same article, Bud's advisory got the same article, and so forth with the other two. And that kind of made it much easier because it was that one class working on that advisory versus Lindsay's class having 4 different articles spread around in that class. So that made it much easier. So I'm looking at ways that I can do that next semester because it makes it easier for the kids, and it also makes it easier for the advisor that's over that.
That's so good. And I think that's something that we need to leverage more, is those sort of especially around literacy practices, those sort of natural groupings that we have that can use pieces of literature or pieces of nonfiction as discussion points in their circles, and they're all reading them, and they can lean in on each other and kind of help each other, and have that good collaborative piece around the fact that, they all have that. And I also love the fact that, that academic is spilling over into the advisory then. And so once again, Bud with his advisory is going to have some clues about what's happening in your classes because his kids are all going to be involved in that. So that's super cool. Cool. Do you have any other things that you've been thinking about moving forward?
I think I know you try to take what you were doing the year before and just try to okay, we're just going to make everything digital. We're just going to keep it the same, just make it digital. That doesn't work. You can't give the same amount of workload that you would give in a setting when COVID was not here. It's easier because you're in the classroom with the teacher and you're not. And so I'm looking at more of focusing on projects next semester. So we'll be doing a Midsummer Night's Dream Shakespeare next semester. So I'm focusing on a project. I don't want to focus on doing all these multiple different assignments throughout that unit. I want to focus on the project alone and students just working on that throughout the semester. So I'm trying to cut down on the amount of assignments that I'm given, but they're still learning. I'm not taking any of the learning away. I'm just focusing more on the project versus those small assignments here and there.
Yeah, I think that as I watch my own kids do digital, every time and they had the first year, they might get in a given day for one of their classes 4 or 5 little assignments all pushed out on Google Classroom.
Yeah.
And every time you do one of those, that's an opportunity for slippage, right? It's another, it's an opportunity not for learning. I mean, there is a learning gap there that happens, but it's really more of a mechanical slippage. Oh, it's another thing I've got to remember to open up. It's another thing I've got to remember to turn in. It's another thing I've got to, and there's all those, individual sort of disconnected pieces that are happening. And it turns into like a mechanical procedural thing more so than like, than it actually being about the learning. So I think that's one of the things that I've seen that, yeah, if you can go to bigger pieces, and of course you got to have it's got to be broken down and there's got to be checkpoints.
Yeah.
But if it's part of a larger whole, then it seems to be more, it seems to be more conducive to this environment than
Because I mean, when you're thinking of them doing virtually, there's no need for bell work. Why do we need bell work? There's no need for it. There's no need for an exit ticket. They're not leaving anywhere. So there's those little small things. There's no use for those while we're in COVID right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's like, and I think that, yeah, those sort of, I don't know. I think it's also, I mean, I think that's why the project piece also, if they have that driving, like I said, you've got to have the individual checkpoints along the way and small pieces, but it's just more, it feels more meaningful, I think, too, especially if that project can be individualized some and really like into something they care about. But yeah, that whole, like, just the worksheet mentality, of every day I'm giving them and they're doing this thing and then turning it back in. It just turns into it's a procedural headache, as much as anything. And I mean, my kids are doing that. It's like, okay, some days they have to print stuff off here at the house and then do it on paper because they want to work on paper, and then they have to take a picture of it and then upload it. It's just like, it's a pain.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, I think we probably have delved pretty far into this. One of the things I want to do now is because Future School shout out culture. So I'm going to give all the guests on the podcast an opportunity to shout out someone or something, and as much as they want or as few as they want. But any shout outs you want to give out there?
Shout out to the senior class. You guys ended your junior year in COVID, and you're starting your senior year in COVID. So just shout out to you guys for staying on top of it. Shout out to our admin. You guys have done an amazing job with providing so much support for us through this. No one can take COVID away from us, but just knowing that you guys are there to listen and you're, changing things when it needs to be changed. Just shout out to Future School, period. I think we've done an amazing job. We jumped out in front of this before COVID hit, and we sat down and came up with a plan. We worked our butts off in the summertime, coming up with a plan for this year. We're working our butts off again, trying to come up with a plan to change things for second semester. So just really shout out to the entire Future School family, really.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think that, and we may scale and get bigger and have multiple campuses and all that stuff. But I mean, whenever we started this school, it was always like, I want to be small enough where we can sit around a table or in a circle and really talk. And I think whenever we talk about being able to pivot and do, make new plans, I mean, it's because our, people like you and Bud and Belk and whoever can come in and give, and we can get feedback from everybody in a meaningful way, And so it may be us that are kind of guiding things or that are kind of trying to keep the big picture as much in mind as possible, but it's really being able to, have that you all able to communicate up and say, here's what we're seeing, here's where we're having problems, and us being able to be responsive to that. So shout out to you all for constantly, keeping that communication open and being willing to experiment and change and be responsive. Because there hasn't been a single year of Future School it's been like the one before. That's for sure. Every year is a new and exciting adventure. So that's awesome. Well, Crystal, thanks for jumping on, and I hope you have a very, very merry holidays and great holidays and a good break where you get to sleep in some and not have to do too much grading.
Yeah, none. Thanks, Boyd.
All right, thank you. Take care.